Okay, so we're in the last day of our listening and perception notes. We've talked about how the five senses build our perception of the world around us. We've talked about how hearing and listening are not the same thing. We talked about how we can actively listen and actively pay attention. We talked about the five motivators for listening. Yesterday, we talked about listening to understand something, listening to evaluate and make a decision, listening for enjoyment or happiness, listening for discrimination, and by that, kind of like sorting out certain sounds. And then the last one, the most important one, at least according to Mr. Smith, is empathetic listening, which is listening to people with the idea that you are seeing it from their point of view or seeing it from where they're coming from. So that way they don't feel alone in their thoughts. We've also talked about just in general how quite a few people don't listen very well. And today we're going to kind of finish up the notes talking about nonverbal communication specifically, and we're also going to talk about eye contact because that is one of the most important things in communication. But it's not as set in stone as you might think just from like what you know about eye contact to be true. So the first thing that I want to talk about are the five different ways that we use nonverbal communication. So the first one that I have is for emblems. So we have body movements that stand for other items, such as shrugs or thumbs up. Shrugging means I don't know. A student asked me yesterday, and I forgot because I hadn't looked at the notes yet today. But they asked me if a certain gesture that's not appropriate to do in school was verbal or nonverbal communication. And I said that since it was tied to words, it was verbal. But in the case of this, according to our notes, it is not going to be considered verbal. It's going to be considered nonverbal, but it is an emblem. So it stands for other items. So thumbs up does mean yes, and shrugging your shoulders does mean I don't know. But in a lot of instances, it can't be considered verbal communication all the time because that gesture might not mean the same thing to every single person. So I'm kind of walking that back a little bit, but yes, if you're not using words, then you're not using verbal communication, even if it is tied to something. Next, we have illustrators. These are gestures that are used with language to kind of like clarify. So, for example, people that talk and they clap their hands like that because they're upset, or they really need people to listen to them. That is an example of an illustrator. Next, we have a regulator. These are you use nonverbal communication to regulate verbal communication, taking turns when you're communicating, such as raising your hand to ask questions. If we've ever been in a movie theater, hey, remember movie theaters? Those were fun. But in the newer ones, they have those like little lights that you can press, and people will come and like bring you food. So that's an example of a regulator because they're saying, hey, you can talk to me now, and you didn't use any words. So far we have that it can replace another item or another message. It can illustrate or kind of emphasize that, and it can also regulate verbal communication. For the next slide, nonverbal communication can also affect displays. It expresses emotion. So what I mean by that is like if you've had a teacher that ever looked at you like this, they don't really need to say anything for you to understand that they are visibly annoyed. And so this is just a way for you to express emotion through nonverbal means. And then the last one is adapting. So we do a lot of like nonverbal things to adapt to how we're feeling on the inside. So if we're happy, we'll laugh or smile. If we're sad, we will cry. We'll clench our fists. We'll bite our nails. We'll pull at our hair. We'll do something that is going to kind of adapt to what is happening. Because yes, sometimes if we're stressed out, we will do like unhealthy things, kind of like chewing our nails. Maybe we like pick our beard or pick like hair or anything like that. But that is a way just to show non-verbally we are adapting to what's happening in our head. So you might notice that you like click a pen or something, and you do that because you're anxious or something. But either way, we use nonverbal communication for these five reasons. To recap it really quick, to be emblems or to represent another message or another statement. Then we have illustrate to kind of help emphasize or stress what is being said. To regulate regular communication or verbal communication, I should say. And then also to affect displays and showing that we are adapting to our current behavior. So those are the two things that those are the five things that we focus on. For the last two slides, I want to talk about space, not like outer space. I want to talk about like space in between people. So you might recognize one of the words that we see here on the screen, which is social distance. So the space we have between people varies. Obviously, we're not super close to everyone all the time because how do we get anything done? But we do have four different distinct levels of what we think is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So let me get a smaller arrow just to kind of make this work. Perfect. Okay, so first we have intimate distance. So these are it's usually reserved for like friends, significant others, or maybe like close family members, or even in some cases, if you're talking to a teacher, you might be super close. This is anywhere from physically touching someone to 18 inches away from them. Okay, so that's kind of like your own individual bubble. Most desks in schools are probably planned that way so that you at least have your intimate distance covered. Like you're not gonna have anyone that's like right up in your business. Moving the arrow down to personal distance. Personal distance is going to be anywhere from 18 inches to 4 feet away from you. People have their personal bubble. They have their thing that they're doing. So they're those people that, like maybe they're walking through the hall by themselves, or maybe they're kind of just hanging out outside and they don't really talk with anyone. But if someone's like, well, you're invading my personal space, that's usually what this is referring to. Anywhere from 18 inches to 4 feet away from you is your own personal bubble that you should try to protect whenever you can. This next one is one that we are very familiar with. Mr. Smith, I thought social distance was 6 feet apart. So 6 feet falls in this window. So social distance can be anywhere from 4 feet to 12 feet. So we didn't make these notes after COVID. This is just something that we've always taught. So social distance has existed for years and years and years. The idea is that anytime that you're going to be social with someone, you're probably about 4 feet to 12 feet away from them. The reason why the CDC decided to use 6 feet is because if you were 4 feet, that's probably too close. And being 12 feet apart from everybody, that's something that's not really workable in a lot of like stores and other situations. So they were really trying to find the safest distance where it could mitigate the spread of COVID-19, but also make sure that it was being safe. And also that the businesses could actually work. And if people did need to congregate for some reason, they didn't congregate too close or too far away from another. And then the last one, of course, is public distance. So this is if you see someone in the hallway, but they're all the way at the end of the hallway. So for example, I'm in the math wing. And so if someone's all the way in the science wing, they're like 20 feet down, you're not really going to have a good conversation with them. So you're going to have to get closer either to social distance or to personal distance. So that's just a good example of how space is broken up. We go anywhere from our intimate distance all the way to public distance. For our last slide, I want to talk about eye movement. So our eyes are very important because one, it's how we see, but two, it also does control how we are focusing on situations. And the way that our eyes move around a lot is very, very purposeful. So there's a couple of reasons why this happens. Let me resize my arrow. Okay, perfect. So the first reason why we would make eye contact or move our eyes is because we're opening up a communication channel. Even you guys said it in the warm up. I don't look at them all the time, but I will occasionally glance at them to let them know that hey, we're communicating. So this has probably happened to you before, but have you ever been in like a group of friends where you're telling a story and then all of a sudden no one is making eye contact with you, so you don't even know if they're paying attention. But then you look in the corner and there's that one friend like, hey, keep telling the story. I'm really invested in this. And so you keep telling the story because you've made that eye contact. But it can be very difficult for people to think that you're communicating with them if you don't make eye contact, or at least look at them for like a split second and then move off. But I'm going to talk more about that as we get into the next few bullet points. Now, another reason why we use eye movements is to demonstrate concern. So if you are worried about someone, you might have a worried look. You can also maybe like raise an eyebrow if you're curious, but you can also like kind of gesture with your hands, but also show that your eyes are basically saying, something's not right with this person. I want to let them know. Like, so if your eyes are moved towards that person or around that person, you're basically showing them that you are concerned for them and you have a reason to worry about them or be curious about them. The next one is gathering feedback. So we use our eyes to kind of take in everything around us. That is one of the ways that we build our perception. The way that we see visual messages are through our eyes. So we gather feedback by doing that. So we can enlarge our eyes to show surprise, but we can also cry to show sadness. So our eyes do control quite a few things, but it also controls messages. If we're crying, that is sending a message out to someone else that we are not okay right now. We are upset by something, and we desperately need something to kind of fix that. So far we've gotten that our eyes can open communication channels, demonstrate concern, but it can also gather feedback. Now I want to talk about the last one because I feel like this one is very, very relevant, especially now. I feel like a lot more people, especially with quarantine being close to almost 1 year, are feeling especially anxious because they don't really know how to communicate anymore. And it can be very, very difficult for like people to feel as though anyone really cares. But in the terms of using our eyes to moderate anxiety, you don't have to keep eye contact with someone. So like there are people like, look me in the eyes whenever you're talking to me. Sure, that's fine to ask, but also to protect your own like personal feelings and your own personal autonomy, it might be a good idea to not do that all the time. Look them in the eyes like for like a minute or two, but if you need to kind of recompose yourself, maybe look at the floor or look off to the side. This happens quite a bit, especially with people with like social anxiety and people that just aren't really comfortable talking to people. They won't look directly at them. Maybe they'll look behind them, or they'll look at their shoes or their feet, or maybe something like on the wall or anything, but it's basically a way for you to moderate your anxiety to make sure that you don't freak out. Because I do know that a lot of triggers for anxiety attacks and a lot of panic attacks can be what you're looking at. And so what you're looking at can cause you to, spiral further and further into that hole. And so you do want to try to use your eye movements or your oculesics, according to the notes, to moderate that anxiety to make sure that you aren't in constant stress. So people look away from you. People will not make eye contact all the time, but that's just because they're trying to take care of themselves, and it shouldn't be something that is like looked down upon, I should say. So that's going to be it for the notes. So to recap everything, obviously we use our eye movements to open up communication, to demonstrate concern, gather feedback, and take care of our own personal anxieties. We've also established. Let me get rid of the annotation. Perfect. We've also established the different types of space. We have intimate distance, personal distance, social distance, and public distance. And then we know that nonverbal communication, which is anything that doesn't use words, it can be emblematic, it can illustrate something, regulate something, affect displays of emotion, or show that we are currently adapting to our emotions. So that's going to be it for this, at least new information regarding listening, perception, and nonverbal communication.